Welcome back, and thank you for joining A Shark's Perspective. So, we're all navigating through the uncertain waters of leadership today. Many automatically think that you have to be the captain of the ship or a C suite executive to lead. But in an era where we really need better leadership, what are you doing to show up and to inspire change? Where many people simply see fear, how do you shift from worry, insecurity, and self doubt to inspiration, clarity, and confidence? Steve Gutzler is the president of Leadership Quest, a Seattle based leadership development company. He's a keynote speaker and the author of several books, including his newest, Lead with No Fear. And on this episode, we'll discuss leadership, 7 shifts, making 3-degree shifts over a 90-day period, humility and servant leadership, some famous Seahawks, coffees of the Northwest, the Heimlich maneuver, marlin fishing, and a lot more. So let's tune in to a leader with no fear as he speaks to a leader of the fearless sharks on this episode of A Shark's Perspective. Steve, thank you so much for joining us today on A Shark's Perspective. So for those who haven't been lucky enough to catch you keynoting on a stage over the last several decades or reading one of your books, introduce us briefly and tell us a little bit about your background and your career today.
Yeah, thanks, Shark. First of all, it's great to be with you.
Yeah, absolutely.
I actually started over 2 decades ago, and the thing that humanizes my story is I started my company when I was 4 months unemployed, and I really started dreaming about what would I really like to do with my life, and it all narrowed down to leadership, speaking, inspiring greatness in others. So we're a Seattle-based firm. I do keynoting around the country when we're not in a virus shutdown, and I do a lot of things on emotional intelligence, transformational leadership, and now this new subject of leading with no fear.
Yeah.
So that's really my heart passion right now.
Well, I got a copy of the book, Leading with No Fear, your 90-day leadership from worry, insecurity, and self-doubt to inspiration, clarity, and confidence. I know you co-authored this with Mike Acker, but tell us a little bit about the book and where you see it being part of your life go forward and why that message was important to you.
Yeah, I think number one is over the last 2 decades, I've observed something in myself and other leaders, and that is real change never typically occurs with quantum leaps. It's usually 3-degree, these small shifts, 3-degree choices or 3-degree new habits that we make that over the course of 30, 60, 90 days has high impact. So the premise of the book is that you can change. It will take 90 days, but you need to make a focus on a 3-degree shift. And so Mike and I have identified these 7 critical shifts that leaders can make. And something I've been living. I don't think you ever fully master these, but it's something I try to live every day, every week, and certainly coach all my clients around it and talk about it, speak about it a lot.
Well, you talk about the three degree, and I thought that was a really interesting way to describe it. Why did you describe it 3 degrees? Why? I mean, I know everybody knows that we're generally heading in the right direction and need to make slight shifts in order to make those big changes, but where did you come up with that 3-degree principle?
Well, it really I've always thought about it as incremental. I've always thought about it as a something small that over time compounds into something spectacular, right? But it really clicked for me a few years ago when I studied aircraft carriers, and when commanders say 3 degrees to the right, no one on the ship of an aircraft carrier, 4,500 member crew, feels that shift. But over 90 days, they can be in a completely different continent.
That's a great point. Well, when I read this, and the timing could not be more spot on. This is a topic where we're lacking leadership. You know, there are a lot of people that are out there speaking about, well, that are in there speaking. I mean, I guess we're all in virtual stages today, but this is a topic that seems more important than ever, especially as we emerge out of coronavirus pandemic, and really spot on with where we see leadership need to move forward. So I'm kind of curious if you're seeing more leadership in today's world or less with what you see with leaders, whether it be political, not political, companies, brands, how they're responding either to the pandemic, to social unrest. But that's why I thought this reading through this really made a lot of sense from a timing perspective. And it sort of makes me even start to look at some of our leaders in a little bit different way and how they need to change.
Yes, I think you're right. And I always like to start with the premise of what is leadership. And I usually will ask audiences that all the time. If I'm doing a workshop or a presentation, I'll say, what's leadership? And you'll get people responding. Leadership is kind of multifaceted, it's not a one cut diamond, but it certainly has to do with whether or not you can positively influence other people. It has to do with your impact that you're creating and your ability to inspire others. So we tend to think of it as positional or titles. That's all important. My son's in law enforcement. You have to have commanders. You have to have, but some of the worst leaders I know have positions. And some of the best leaders I know have no title at all. And so leadership is more about how you show up. Are you growing? Are you changing? Then you're probably a leader. And I usually will say, people that struggle with change, even this current day. I mean, we've gone through the stages of grief, anger, denial, anger, bargaining. Maybe I can maneuver around this virus. Profound sadness and depression. Mental illness is a real issue with everybody, including leaders. But the fifth stage is acceptance. And how will I not surrender, but how will I accept and move forward? And that's what you're seeing. I think leaders today are accepting. They're finding meaning and purpose in this new day. I would have never written Lead with No Fear had it not been for the coronavirus. We were thinking about writing it. Mike and I were thinking about writing it. But when we got sheltered in place, we're in the state of Washington. We were the second state sheltered in place. I said, Mike, what better time to write this? And it's based upon 90 days, right? 90-day changes. And get this, Shark, we wrote and published this book in 90 days.
That's hard to do.
And it is hard to do. But so in a way, the virus, as devastating it has been to so many people, I'm not minimizing, but in a way, it was kind of a blessing in disguise. And I think often we look at life through a lens of obligation and fear and what a scarcity. And I think if we open up to, hey, what's the new opportunity? I would never be interviewed with you right now had it not been for this, because the book led to podcasts, the podcast leads to your audience. So there's a new audience, there's a new market that everybody can tap into if we can get to that place of acceptance and meaning and purpose, if that makes sense.
Absolutely, it does. And, just from my own point of view, I just want to add, knowing, as I'm sure you do, being the father of one, but I just want to, thank your son for his service, because I know a great majority. We're recording this not long after everything that happened with the unrest, but a great majority of the police forces out there, of all colors, respect the public and treat them well. So I never want to underestimate the importance of how much they are appreciated by people like me as well, who know how important they are. So, and especially you're in Washington, which has been ground zero for a lot of that as well, or maybe not ground zero, but a lot of the things that have happened on the news as of late. So talk about the case studies. You had some great case studies and basically lay out the 7 case studies of the real life leaders, but at a high level, talk about that and what went into those as far as the 7 studies in the book.
Yeah, so we've got these 7 shifts, and I read, I'm an avid reader like you, and I love reading on leadership, but I've always loved books that include, whether they be real life testimonials or, in our case studies. So we wanted to back up these shifts with real data, with real life examples of leaders making this shift. So we've got Beth Frades, who talks about health and wellness, Harvard professor, amazing lady on lifestyle medicine. Wes Herman, the CEO of Woods Coffee, tells the story of how the vision of Woods Coffee and then the setback of being thrown in federal prison for some fraudulent prescriptions. And he's very vulnerable, but he talks about how to keep that vision alive. So the case studies, I think, bring the principles of the shift to life. And Mike and I try to weave in our own anecdotes and illustrations. But being in the industry like yourself for me over 2 decades, you meet fascinating people. You hear these incredible stories, and they're always like comeback stories. So I think this will be a book that people will say, "Wow! Not only can I make the shift, but I relate. I relate to the leaders who make
Yeah,
the shifts."
very much so. I found the same thing. I found them to be very relatable, especially with you mentioned Beth Frady's chapter 6, from smart to
Mm-hmm.
smart and healthy. I thought that was a great chapter as well. Were there any of those leaders that really was there a favorite leader, if you will? And I mean, not necessarily favorite, but was there a favorite story of all of them that really stood out as the best one to represent the entire book?
Well, that's tough, but I do. I
Yeah, it's your
do.
7 children, and which one do you like the best? So
Yeah, so you love them all the same, but you have this one that you have an affinity with, and maybe it's because Rob and I share about the same age. It's the final shift, shifting from
fast
fast
to
to finish.
finishing. Yeah.
And uh, I met. He's the CEO of a behavioral health company, very successful CEO, and we were meeting in Portland or Seattle up here for dinner. I was going to do a management retreat for his company, and over the course of dinner, he said, "Steve, what do you think is the number one quality of an effective leader?" And this is my lane, right? I should know that. What is the number one thing?
Yeah. Yeah.
And my mind is swirling because I've always believed leadership is multifaceted. So I'm thinking, is it vision? Is it clarity? Is it inspiration? Is it integrity? And I go, Rob, I have some things in mind, but I'd like to hear you. And just then he jumped up out of his seat. A woman collapsed in the restaurant right behind us and heard a loud thud. And he jumped down by her and got by her, and a woman said, she's having a convulsion. And Rob looked, he was literally 6 inches from her face. He goes, no, she's not breathing. She's choking. And he reached up and gave her a Heimlich, and out popped a piece of meat. And he saved her life. And then he later helped them get to their car, and he got the valet service and all that. And when he came back, I go, Rob, that was amazing. And he goes, I go, what again is the number one quality that you see in leadership? And he goes, I think it's humility. And it was so ironic because in that moment he literally demonstrated servant leadership and humility to me,
Mm-hmm.
saving and being understated in it, taking care of that couple, getting their car, paying for the valet, helping them pack up their food because she was embarrassed and was under trauma. And so Rob goes on in that chapter and explains that every response that he gives goes through the filter of humility. And he literally will think, does this advance me or does this serve the conversation? And when we interviewed him for Fast to Finishing, I knew he was the type of leader I would want to talk about this. But the things that he uncovers in our last chapter, I think, deeply challenge me. I mean, he talks about how he pauses before responding. He talks about checking his motive. He goes, you can only lead from two places. Either you're going to lead from love or you're going to lead from ego. And when he said that in our interview, it was like somebody hit me with a 2x4 because I'm like, oh man, do I need to work on my checking my ego, right? Because and it's funny because it shows up like I'll go, honey, did you notice I cleaned the kitchen, or I'll speak and I'll finish and I'll turn to somebody and go, did that go okay? Looking for additional affirmation. It shows up in so many insidious ways in my life. I'm not shaming myself, but that's what I loved about Rob. It was like he held a, not that he's mastered it, but he put a nice bar up there for us in the final chapter.
No, I thought it was fantastic, and I would say the same. Not that I've necessarily exhibited that level either, or ever given anybody the Heimlich maneuver, but as somebody who's done martial arts my whole life, that's one of the main things they teach you is humility, not all the other stuff about how to kick butt or break boards and things like that, but really most martial artists
Yes.
really understand at the core of how to submit yourself. So you've been speaking about this for years, and now you've written a book during a pandemic. Do you think that leaders maybe have transitioned their thoughts as well going forward? Because when we come out of this and you're speaking to audiences all over the world, there's going to be a different mindset from the audience than you would have had in 2019 or before. Where do you
Yes.
sort of think that audience will be with their mindsets when we really sort of come out of this? Because this could be, I mean, it could be 2022 before we get lazy in our thoughts again to where we're comfortable enough to shake hands instead of fist bump, like we
Yeah.
discussed with the logo on the cover. Where do you think people are going to be when they hear this message mentally?
Well, I honestly, there's an honest answer to that, and then there's a safe answer, and I'm going to give you the honest answer. I think people have really suffered through this pandemic at different levels. I think the mental health strain has been amazing.
Mhm.
I was on a Zoom call with a group of managers from a startup technology company last week, and I said, it was just a small Zoom call with the managers, 6 people on a Zoom. And I said, I want you to write down one word, a one word description of how you're feeling right now, how you've been feeling. And I've got the piece of paper: drained, anxious, fatigued, disturbed, stressed, and battle weary. And I said, thank you for your honesty because I felt all those. And I go, that's not because you're a weak person. That reflects the fact that you're a human being. We've been through a lot of trauma. We've got the virus, the unrest, things that have impacted my son in law enforcement, things that have impacted my income, and we've all experienced it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Very few people have come through this unscathed. It'd be like, you know, paint, going on a paint gun, where we're
Yeah.
getting very few people ever come out with any marks. So I think, yes, this message, when I get back on the road keynoting, and I'll be doing Lead with No Fear workshops, we can do it online, but I'm going to explain what we've been through and then offer hope. And the hope are the 7 shifts. I think people need a roadmap. People need a game plan. I'm not saying this is foolproof or the only, but I love the fact that we've provided a 90-day
Yeah.
guide.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I'm excited. I'm excited. I feel like it's going to give me a second wind and a second message, if you will.
Well, I think just to add my own 2 cents to this, I think for everybody, this is a different reset. I mean, we go through something that's pretty substantial every decade, right? But this seems to be a lot different than other things than I can remember. I mean, because it was for 3 solid months so far. I mean, we've been dealing with this for 6 months, really for 6 months, the first half of 2020, and for the last half as well, little as it scales down. But it's sort of a asterisk year. And so
Mm-hmm.
everybody is going to have a before and after story that relates to this, maybe not to other things. And so the fact that they were able to tell you on that Zoom call all of those feelings that they felt, they wouldn't have been able to say last year or the year before. Those
Mm-hmm.
they wouldn't have even, a lot of them wouldn't have even been brave enough to say those kind of comments. And people are able to
That's right.
talk about it today. So maybe if anything, it's opened up to be a little more, for lack of a better phrase, vulnerable. But that can also show a lot of leadership as well if you know how to channel it correctly. So I found this to be a really, really good book, and I just found it to be extremely. There's a lot of books I've seen suffer in sales, for example, because they came out at the wrong time. Yours fit perfectly as to when. I'm sure you're dying to get back out on the stage to talk about this. So, Steve, I asked this of all my guests. You're not that far away from the water. What is your favorite kind of shark and why?
Oh, well, it would have to be a sand shark because I actually caught one
Okay,
once fishing, and
you threw
it
him
was
back, I
so
hope.
cool. Yeah, yeah, we
Okay,
did, we
good.
did. But it was so cool, like to be able to catch a shark
Yeah.
and claim to catch a shark, right?
All right.
And yeah, I mean, like I was marlin fishing, but I got
Yeah.
this shark, but it was a really spectacular, fish, and of
Yeah.
course we released it. But that would have to be my favorite because it's the only shark I've seen up close, unlike you.
Well, did you ever catch any marlin?
Yes, we did. We caught a couple, I think two pretty sick. This was back in, probably 10 years ago. I was
Mm-hmm.
in Cabo and
Yeah. Oh,
spontaneously
yeah.
ran into a friend who was going out fishing. I'm not much of a fisherman, but it was a pretty
Yeah.
cool day to
Oh,
go
I'm
out and
sure it
catch a couple
was. I'm
marlin.
sure it was. Well, Steve, it's that special time in the show. Are you ready for the 5 most interesting questions that you're going to be asked today?
Love it. Love it.
All
Bring
right.
it on. These are the most important.
The most important. So, number one, you're in the Seattle area, and this also goes with your book. You'll make sense. Woods Coffee or Starbucks?
Yeah, Woods Coffee, which is only known in the Northwest.
Mm-hmm.
It's a small brand. They've got about uh, 12, 14 stores, I believe. But the customer service, when you go in there, Starbucks actually studies their customer service.
That's awesome.
The the ambiance, the culture, and of course the coffee is awesome. So I'm in around Seattle. There's Woods Coffee, so I'm always looking. Where's Woods? And I have nothing against Starbucks.
No,
They were actually one of my first big time clients.
no, same here. I love a neighborhood coffee shop that's done well. I just wish they had apps like Starbucks. So
Yeah, yeah,
number two, you've got a. I'm noticing the Seahawks love there on the logo on your shirt.
yeah.
Russell Wilson or Steve Largent?
Oh, I would say I'm old school because I remember Largent, but Russell is a stud, right? I mean, he's just taken the game, to a new level. His ability to visualize, his ability to bounce back after a bad play, his leadership. Um, I watch them every week when they're on, so I just see these magical moments. And it's not just his athleticism, I think it's his emotional intelligence, his ability to harness leadership and channel it. So, yeah, Russell Wilson.
Yeah, it's easy to find a number two like Largent, but it's hard to find anybody that competes with Russell in number one. All right, number three, Splash or Emotional Intelligence. Two of your previous books. Got to see which one of them today is your favorite child.
I would say my book Splash. It was it's a motivational book. It's similar to Lead with No Fear. It's filled with lots of stories, anecdotal stories. It's a light read. It's about 115, 18 pages. Something that you could sit by a pool or be on a boat and just read a chapter. There's 10 principles on that on motivation. So Splash was fun to write, and it's just kind of comes from my heart.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say Splash.
Okay, number four, and this is a good leadership question because I know you're both. Being a father or being a grandfather?
Oh man, that's brutal. Um, I would say being a grandfather because you get the benefit of even observing your children
Yeah.
being parents. So it's pretty cool to go and hang out with my little grandkids. And um, we were up playing golf. We got to play golf last weekend, and with my two sons, one's married, one's single, and my son-in-law, and then going back to the cabin and seeing the grandkids. And so seeing the grandkids is almost surreal. Uh, it's hard to explain, but
Mm-hmm.
and it's kind of cool. Like you get to play with them, and then when you're kind of beat tired, you send them home
Right.
and have a glass
Yeah.
of wine and say,
Yeah.
"Okay, that was fun, but I'm glad they're going home."
Exactly. Exactly. All right. Number five, and the most important question that you're going to be asked today: biscuits or cornbread?
Wow, you would from your part of the country, you would have this amazing understanding of which one would be better. I don't. We don't have like a lot of places. Like my dad had a pancake house. We did biscuits and gravy.
Mm-hmm.
So that was pretty good. My wife makes great cornbread with chili. It's got actual pieces of corn in it. And so I'm going to go with cornbread.
Okay. Steve, where can people find out more about you? Hopefully, see you on stage one day soon and then get a copy of Lead with No Fear.
Yeah, I hope they do. I hope we get to see them in person. You can go right to my website, and it's stevegutzler.com. And you can also find Lead with No Fear, Amazon, your favorite bookstore. You can order it. Amazon's a quick turnaround. So I think they'll really like it. And in 30 days, I'm not exactly sure when this will come out, but mid-July, we'll have the Lead with No Fear workbook, which is an interactive workbook for leaders. And with all of the goal sheets, all of the worksheets, that will come out in about 30 days. So keep that in mind too.
Yeah,
That's going to be a really cool vision. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, Steve, thank you so much for being with us today on A Shark's Perspective.
Man, it's been a blast, man. I got to meet you in person.
Yeah, you will definitely someday. So there was my conversation with Steve Gutzler, the president of Leadership Quest, a Seattle-based leadership company, a keynote speaker, and the author of several books, including Lead with No Fear. Let's take a look at 3 key takeaways from my conversation with him. First, what is leadership? As he said, it's not a one-cut diamond. We tend to think of this as titles and people, but that's not always the people really impacting change. Look at how you show up and look at the leader in you. But Steve also reminds us with a great story, and he believes that humility is the number one trait of a great leader, and I would be hard-pressed to disagree. So don't look at leadership through the lens of obligation, fear, and scarcity. As he said, and I'll quote, but think about how you look at it as opportunity if we can get to acceptance and meaning and purpose. Great point. Second, real change never typically occurs in quantum leaps. He sees that high-impact change transpiring over 90 days. And much like navigating a large ship, it's making those slight changes that can have a large impact over time. Make a 3-degree shift, and in one day you had just slightly left. Give it 90 days, and you'll be heading towards Hawaii. That's my shift, and ship anyways. Third, people need a roadmap and a game plan. They need leaders they can relate to every day. Leaders like you. No one ever fully masters leadership, but the journey sure is a lot of fun. Got a question? Send me an email to kenneth@asharksperspective.com. Thank you again for the privilege of your time. Want to be a Braveheart? Then don't be afraid to support the many great men and women who serve as police officers today, and for so many who respect us and treat us well. Join us on the next episode of A Shark's Perspective.